I never thought I'd be sitting in a hotel room at 62, staring at legal documents that could change everything, wondering how my own son could look me in the eye and tell me I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. But that's exactly where I found myself 3 weeks ago. And honestly, it might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters more than you might think. 25 years ago, when my husband died suddenly in a car accident, I made a choice that would define the next quarter century of my life. Marcus was only 12, and instead of remarrying or focusing on rebuilding my own life, I poured everything into being both mother and father to him. I worked 2 jobs, days at the insurance company, evenings doing bookkeeping for local businesses, just to keep us afloat and maintain the house his father had loved. But here's what Marcus never knew. 6 months after his father's death, I received a life insurance settlement of $3.2 million. Instead of spending it on myself or even telling Marcus about it, I invested every penny. I was smart about it, conservative but strategic. I diversified, reinvested dividends, and watched that money grow steadily over the years. By the time Marcus turned 18, that $3.2 million had become nearly $5 million, and I did something that felt right at the time. I put it all into a trust fund for him, with myself as the sole trustee. The plan was simple. He'd get access when he turned 30 and had proven he could handle that kind of responsibility. Marcus is 27 now, and he has no idea that trust fund exists. All those years I lived modestly. I drove the same Honda Civic for 15 years. I shopped at discount stores and clipped coupons religiously. When Marcus needed money for college, I told him we'd have to take out loans. And we did, because I believed he needed to understand the value of education and work for what he achieved. I watched him graduate summa cum laude from business school. I celebrated when he landed his first job at a consulting firm. I was proud when he bought his first house at 24. A beautiful colonial in the suburbs that I helped him move into, painting bedrooms and hanging curtains like any devoted mother would. And when he got married to Jessica 2 years ago, I was the one who insisted on paying for the rehearsal dinner, even though it meant dipping into my meagre savings account. "Mum, you don't have to do this," he'd said, but I could see the relief in his eyes. Jessica's parents had already covered the wedding, and I knew the young couple was feeling stretched thin. "It's what your father would have wanted," I told him, and I meant it. Marcus thrived in his career. By 26, he was making 6 figures and had been promoted twice. Jessica worked in marketing and pulled in a respectable salary herself. They seemed happy, successful, and grateful for the foundation that I'd helped provide, which is why what happened 3 weeks ago felt like such a betrayal. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. I'd been working at Morrison & Associates for 8 years, handling their accounts receivable and general bookkeeping. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and at 62, steady felt like enough. I had my small apartment, my routine, and the quiet satisfaction of watching my son build his life. Then the recession hit our Central Valley town harder than anyone expected. Morrison & Associates lost 3 major clients in 2 months, and Mr. Morrison called me into his office on a Tuesday morning with the look of a man about to deliver bad news. "Carmen, you know I think the world of you," he began, and I felt my stomach drop. "But we're going to have to make some cuts. I'm so sorry. I'd been through layoffs before. I knew the drill. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to co-workers who looked relieved they'd survived another round, and drove home in a daze. The unemployment benefits would cover about half my rent and basic expenses. At 62, finding another job in the Central Valley wasn't going to be easy, especially not at the salary I'd been making. But I'd managed tight finances before. I'd figure it out. What I didn't expect was the phone call from Marcus that evening. "Mum, I heard about Morrison's," he said, and my heart warmed. This was the call I'd been hoping for. My son checking on me, offering support. Word travels fast, I said with a small laugh. I'm fine, honey. These things happen. Well, that's actually why I'm calling. His tone shifted, became more businesslike. Jessica and I have been talking, and we think this might be a good opportunity for you to make some changes. Changes? You know we've been concerned about you living alone in that apartment. And now, with the job situation... He paused, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. We think it might be time for you to consider moving into a senior community. My blood went cold. A senior community? There are some really nice places, Mum. Assisted living facilities with activities and meal plans. You wouldn't have to worry about rent or maintaining an apartment. And honestly, with your employment situation, it might be more financially realistic. I sat down heavily on my couch, the phone pressed against my ear like a lifeline. Marcus, I'm 62, not 92. I don't need assisted living. But you do need a place to live that you can afford, he said, and his tone had an edge I'd never heard before. Jessica ran some numbers, and even with unemployment, you're going to struggle to maintain your current lifestyle. Jessica ran some numbers. Of course she did. I'll find another job, I said quietly. At 62? In this economy? Mum, you need to be realistic. There was that word. Realistic, as if the past 25 years of me juggling 2 jobs, managing a household, and raising him single-handedly had been some kind of fantasy. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. Move in with us temporarily while you explore your options. We can help you research senior communities and transition into something more sustainable. Move in with them. I thought about their pristine house with its white carpets and carefully curated decor. I thought about Jessica's subtle comments over the years about my vintage clothing and my tendency to save plastic containers. I thought about becoming a charity case in my own son's home. That's very generous, I said carefully, but I think I'll manage on my own. Mum. His voice carried that tone he'd perfected in business school. Patient, but firm. This isn't about what you want. This is about what makes sense. You can't afford your apartment anymore. Can't afford, as if he had any idea what I could or couldn't afford. But I didn't tell him about the trust fund. I didn't tell him about the conservative investment portfolio that generated enough passive income to cover my living expenses twice over. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I wanted to see what he would do. I wanted to see what kind of man I'd raised. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls continued. Marcus would check in every few days, and each conversation felt more like a negotiation than a family discussion. Have you looked at Sunset Manor? He'd ask. They have a waiting list, but Jessica knows someone who might be able to help you skip ahead. Or, I drove by Meadowbrook Senior Living yesterday. The grounds are beautiful, and I think you'd really like the community aspect. Never. How are you holding up? Or, what can I do to help you get back on your feet? It was Jessica who delivered the ultimatum. They'd invited me to dinner on a Sunday, my first invitation to their house in over a month. I should have known something was up when Marcus seemed nervous and Jessica kept glancing at the clock. Carmen, Jessica began as she served dessert, we need to talk about your situation. My situation, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person they cared about. We've done some research, she continued, and we've found several excellent senior communities within your budget. Assuming you sell your furniture and most of your belongings, the proceeds should cover the entrance fees. I set down my fork and looked at my son. He was studying his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. And if I'm not ready to make that move? I asked. Jessica exchanged a look with Marcus. Well, that's the thing. We've been patient, but we need to think about our own future. We're trying to start a family, and having a dependent in the house just isn't practical long-term. Dependent. That word hit me like a physical blow. I never asked to be dependent on anyone, I said quietly. But you are, Jessica pressed on. You lost your job, you can't pay your rent, and you're 62 years old. This is reality, Carmen. We're trying to help you face it. I looked at Marcus again, my son, who I'd raised to be kind and compassionate, who I'd taught to respect his elders and take care of family, who had no idea that the woman they were discussing like a burden had $5 million sitting in a trust fund with his name on it. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked. Marcus finally looked up. "We're saying you need to make a decision, either accept help finding appropriate housing or figure out your situation independently. But you can't keep assuming we'll be your safety net indefinitely." Safety net. As if I'd ever asked them for anything more than the basic respect a mother deserved. "And if I choose to figure it out independently?" Jessica's voice was crisp, businesslike. "Then you have 30 days to find alternative arrangements. We can't enable this kind of financial irresponsibility anymore." Financial irresponsibility from the woman whose rehearsal dinner I'd paid for, whose husband I'd supported through college and career transitions, whose life I'd quietly subsidized in a dozen ways over the years. I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I'd expected them to be. 30 days, I repeated. "Mum," Marcus said, and for a moment he sounded like my little boy again. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you face reality." Reality. That word again. "I understand," I said calmly. "Thank you for dinner." I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the wheel despite the storm building inside my chest. 30 days. My own son had given me 30 days to get my life together, as if the past 25 years counted for nothing. That night, I pulled out the trust fund documents I hadn't looked at in years. The account statements showed a current value of $5.3 million. The terms were clear. I had complete discretionary control as trustee until Marcus's 30th birthday, at which point the funds would transfer to him automatically. Unless, of course, I decided to dissolve the trust first. I'd love to know if you've ever experienced something similar. Share your story in the comments below. The next morning, I called my attorney. "Carmen, good to hear from you," David said. He'd been my lawyer since shortly after my husband's death, and he'd helped me set up the trust fund all those years ago. "What can I do for you?" "I need to understand my options regarding Marcus's trust fund," I said. There was a pause. "Has something happened?" "You could say that." I explained the situation, the job loss, the ultimatum, the 30-day deadline. David listened without interruption, and I could practically hear him taking notes. "Well," he said finally, "you have several options. As trustee, you can modify the terms, delay the transfer date, or dissolve the trust entirely and reclaim the funds. But Carmen, I have to ask, does Marcus know about the trust?" "No." "And you haven't told him you're financially secure?" "No." Another pause. "May I ask why?" I thought about that question for a long time. Why hadn't I told him? Why had I let him and Jessica treat me like a charity case when I could have written a check for a house twice the size of theirs? "Because I wanted to see what kind of man I raised," I said finally. David was quiet for a moment. "And what have you discovered? That I may have failed as a parent." "Or," David said gently, "that it's not too late to teach him some important lessons." We scheduled a meeting for the following week. In the meantime, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started spending my money. Not recklessly, but purposefully. I drove to Fresno and bought a wardrobe that actually fit and flattered me. I got my hair professionally styled for the first time in decades. I booked myself into a lovely bed and breakfast for the remainder of my 30 days instead of scrambling for a cheaper apartment. And I started looking at condos. Not senior living facilities, condos, beautiful modern condos with granite countertops and Sierra Nevada views. Because why shouldn't I live somewhere beautiful at this stage of my life? Marcus called on day 15 of my ultimatum. "Mum, I wanted to check in. Have you had any luck with the senior communities?" "I'm exploring my options," I said, which was technically true. "Good. I know this is hard, but you'll be happier in the long run. Jessica found a place called Golden Years that has a really good reputation. The waiting list is only 6 months, and they have financial aid programs." Financial aid for a woman sitting on over $5 million. That's thoughtful of Jessica, I said. She really does care about you, Mum. We both do. This is just about being practical. Practical. I was learning to hate that word. Marcus, I said, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember when you wanted to quit college after your sophomore year? There was a pause. Yeah, vaguely. Why? You said the workload was too intense, and you didn't think you were smart enough for business school. You wanted to drop out and find a job. I remember being stressed, he said carefully. I worked 70-hour weeks that semester to pay for a tutor. I took on 3 extra bookkeeping clients and barely slept. Do you remember what I told you? Another pause. Not really. I told you that Garcias don't quit, that your father didn't raise a quitter and neither did I. I told you that when things get difficult, we find a way through, not a way out. Mum, I don't see what this has to do with... Do you remember what you said when you graduated summa cum laude? Silence. You said thank you for not letting you quit. You said you were grateful I pushed you to see what you were capable of. I was grateful, he said quietly. And now you want me to quit. That's not... This is different, Mum. You lost your job. You can't pay your bills. This isn't about quitting, it's about accepting reality. Reality again? I was so tired of that word. What if I told you, I said slowly, that I'm not as helpless as you think I am? What do you mean? What if I told you that I've been taking care of myself just fine and I don't need your help or your ultimatums? There was a long pause. Mum, are you okay? You're not making a lot of sense. Not making sense, of course. A 62-year-old unemployed woman couldn't possibly have resources they didn't know about. I'm making perfect sense, I said. I'm just not sure you're listening. After we hung up, I sat in my beautiful bed and breakfast room and made a decision. It was time to stop being invisible. I called David and moved up our meeting. I want to modify the trust, I told him when we met the next day. In what way? I want to add performance conditions for Marcus to receive the funds. David raised an eyebrow. What kind of conditions? I want him to demonstrate genuine respect for family, particularly elderly family members. I want him to show that he understands the value of loyalty and gratitude, and I want him to prove he can think beyond his own immediate interests. Carmen, that's quite subjective. How would you measure such things? I thought about that. He has 3 years to show me who he really is. If he passes, he gets the trust at 30 as planned. If he doesn't, I paused. If he doesn't, the money gets donated to charity. David leaned back in his chair. That's a significant change, and it's permanent once we file the modification. I understand. May I suggest a middle ground? Instead of an all-or-nothing approach, why not consider a graduated system, part of the trust released based on demonstrated growth and maturity? I considered this. What did you have in mind? We could establish benchmarks, specific actions or behaviours that unlock portions of the trust. That way he has opportunities to learn and change, rather than facing complete forfeiture. It was a gentler approach than my initial impulse, but perhaps more effective. I like that, I said. We spent the next 2 hours crafting the modified trust terms. Marcus would have multiple opportunities to demonstrate the values I'd tried to instill in him. Each benchmark met would unlock a portion of his inheritance. Fail to meet any of them, and that portion would go to charity instead. The first benchmark was simple. He had 60 days from the date he learned about the trust to apologise for his treatment of me and demonstrate genuine understanding of how his actions had affected our relationship. On day 28 of my ultimatum, I drove to Marcus and Jessica's house. I'd called ahead and asked them both to be there, saying I had something important to discuss about my housing situation. When they opened the door, I could see they barely recognised me. The professional haircut, the well-fitted clothes, the confident posture. I looked like a woman who had her life together. "Mum," Marcus said, "you look different." I feel different, I said. May I come in? We sat in their living room, the same room where Jessica had delivered my ultimatum. She kept glancing at me with a puzzled expression, as if trying to figure out what had changed. So, Jessica said, have you made a decision about your housing situation? I have, I said calmly. I wanted to let you know that I've found a place. Relief flooded Marcus's face. That's wonderful, Mom. Is it one of the senior communities we discussed? Not exactly. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I've purchased a condo. The word purchased seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Purchased? Jessica repeated. Carmen, how could you possibly afford to purchase anything? I handed them the real estate listing. It was a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in the nicest development in the foothills, with panoramic Sierra Nevada views and high-end finishes throughout. The asking price was clearly visible, $485,000. Marcus stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. Mum, I don't understand. Where did you get the money for this? That's an interesting question, I said. It's interesting because in all these weeks of discussing my financial situation, neither of you ever asked about my assets. You just assumed I was broke. Jessica was looking back and forth between the listing and my face. But you said you couldn't afford your apartment rent. No, I corrected gently. I never said that. You said that. You decided I couldn't afford my rent, and you built an entire narrative around my helplessness without ever asking me for the facts. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus finally found his voice. Are you saying you could have afforded your apartment this whole time? I'm saying a lot of things become clear when you stop making assumptions about people. But why? Jessica started, then stopped. Why did I let you believe I was desperate? I finished. Because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to know what kind of people you'd become when you thought someone you supposedly loved was vulnerable and needed help. Marcus was shaking his head slowly. I don't understand any of this. I stood up and walked to their mantel, where they displayed their wedding photo. There I was in the background, beaming with pride at my son and his new wife. Marcus, I said, not turning around. Do you remember your father? Of course. Do you remember what he always said about family? A pause. Family takes care of family. That's right. Family takes care of family. Not by shipping them off to institutions when things get inconvenient, but by standing together when life gets difficult. I turned back to face them. I spent 25 years taking care of you. 25 years putting your needs before my own, making sacrifices so you could have opportunities, working multiple jobs so you could focus on school. And I'm grateful for that, Marcus said quietly. Are you? Because when you thought I needed help, your solution was to get me out of your life as quickly and efficiently as possible. Jessica spoke up. That's not fair. We offered to let you move in with us. Temporarily, I said. While I figured out my exit strategy, you made it clear I was a burden you couldn't wait to be rid of. The hurt in Marcus's eyes was real, and part of me wanted to comfort him the way I had when he was a child, but this was too important. I need you both to understand something, I continued. I don't need your help. I don't need your charity. And I certainly don't need your permission to live my life. I reached into my purse and pulled out a second folder, this one containing the trust fund documents. However, there is something you need to know. I placed the folder on their coffee table and waited. Marcus opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched his face change as the numbers registered. What is this? He whispered. Your inheritance. Your father's life insurance money that I invested 25 years ago. It's grown to over $5 million, and it's been sitting in a trust fund with your name on it since you turned 18. The colour drained from Jessica's face. $5 million? $5.3 million as of last week. Marcus looked up at me, and I could see he was struggling to process this information. You've had $5 million this whole time. I've had $5 million earmarked for you this whole time, I corrected. There's a difference. But why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to work for what you achieved. I wanted you to understand the value of money and effort and education. I wanted you to become the kind of man who would be worthy of that inheritance. The past tense wasn't lost on him. Would be. I sat back down across from them, my voice steady and calm. The trust was set to transfer to you automatically when you turn 30, but trusts can be modified. And after the last few weeks, I've made some changes. I explained the new conditions calmly and thoroughly. Marcus would have multiple opportunities to demonstrate growth and maturity. Each benchmark met would unlock a portion of his inheritance. Each one missed would send that money to charity instead. When I finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of their grandfather clock. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You're blackmailing me with my own inheritance." "No," I said firmly. "I'm giving you the chance to earn what was always meant to be earned. Your father didn't leave you that money so you could treat your family like disposable inconveniences. He left it because he believed you would grow into a man worthy of that responsibility. And you don't think I'm worthy now?" The question hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. I think you're capable of being worthy," I said carefully. "But capability and actuality are two different things." Jessica finally found her voice. "This is insane, Carmen. You can't just manipulate people with money." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "I can't manipulate you with money. The choice is entirely yours. You can continue treating me the way you have, and Marcus can inherit nothing. Or you can choose to examine your behavior and work toward becoming the kind of people who deserve good things in their lives." I stood up again, smoothing my skirt. The first benchmark is simple. Marcus has 60 days to demonstrate genuine understanding of how his actions affected me and to make meaningful amends. Not because he wants the money, but because it's the right thing to do. And if he doesn't, then he loses the first million, and we move on to the next benchmark. Marcus was staring at the trust documents like they might spontaneously combust. "I can't believe you're doing this." "Neither can I," said honestly. "But I've spent 25 years putting your needs first, and I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of being taken for granted. And I'm tired of watching the man I raised treat people the way you've treated me." I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. "I'll be in my beautiful new condo if you want to talk. But Marcus, the timer starts now." As I reached the door, I heard Jessica say, "Carmen, wait." I turned back. I think we owe you an apology." It was a start, a small one, but a start nonetheless. "Apologies are nice," I said gently, "but actions matter more. You have 60 days to show me what kind of actions you're capable of." I drove home to my bed and breakfast, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished, desperate version of myself that Marcus and Jessica had tried to create, but the strong, capable woman who had raised a child alone and built a life from nothing. That evening, Marcus called. "Mom," he said, and his voice was different. Smaller, younger. "I need to understand what happened. I need to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did." "That," I said, "sounds like the beginning of wisdom." We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time since he'd become an adult. He asked questions I didn't expect, and I gave answers I'd never thought I'd have to give. "Why didn't you remarry?" he asked at one point. "Because I was raising you," I said simply. "That was my priority." "But you gave up so much." "I chose what mattered most to me." "That's not the same as giving up." "And the money. Why didn't you ever spend it on yourself?" I thought about that. "Because it wasn't mine. It was your father's legacy to you. My job was to make sure you were ready for it. And now you don't think I am. Now I think you have the opportunity to decide what kind of man you want to be. The money will either be there or it won't, depending on the choices you make." 3 weeks later, Marcus and Jessica showed up at my new condo, not with phone calls or text messages, but in person, with flowers and a handwritten letter. The letter was 3 pages long and detailed not just an apology, but a genuine reckoning with their behaviour. They had spent time thinking about how their actions must have felt from my perspective. They acknowledged specific moments when they had been dismissive, condescending, or cruel. And they outlined concrete steps they wanted to take to rebuild our relationship. "We want to earn your forgiveness," Marcus said as I finished reading. "Not because of the money, but because we love you and we were wrong." "And we want to learn," Jessica added. "I want to understand how to be the kind of daughter-in-law who honours what you've given to this family." It wasn't perfect. Healing never is. But it was real. And it was a beginning. 6 months later, Marcus met his first benchmark. The first $1 million of his trust fund was released to him on his 28th birthday, along with a letter explaining what the next benchmarks would be. But more importantly, our relationship began to heal. Marcus started calling every week, not to check on my situation, but to actually talk. Jessica began including me in their social events, not as an obligation, but as someone whose company they genuinely enjoyed. And when they announced they were expecting their first child, Marcus asked if I would consider moving closer to help with the baby. Not into assisted living, not as a charity case, as a grandmother who had valuable contributions to make to their growing family. The trust fund benchmarks continued over the next 2 years. Some Marcus met easily: acts of service to his community, demonstrations of financial responsibility, evidence of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their economic status. Others took him multiple attempts and considerable soul-searching. But with each benchmark, I watched him grow into the man I'd always hoped he could become. More thoughtful, more compassionate, more aware of his privilege and responsibilities. The final benchmark was the most challenging. He had to demonstrate that he could put family needs ahead of his own immediate desires when it truly mattered. That opportunity came when Jessica's father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and Marcus had to choose between a promotion that would require relocating across the country or staying local to help care for his father-in-law. He chose family, without hesitation and without resentment. On his 30th birthday, Marcus inherited the full remainder of his trust fund, about $3 million after the graduated releases, and my own careful management of the investments. But by then, the money felt almost secondary to what we'd both gained in the process. I learned that being a good parent sometimes means being willing to be disliked in service of teaching important lessons. I learned that my own worth wasn't tied to how much I sacrificed for others. And I learned that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Marcus learned that privilege comes with responsibility, that family is more than a convenient safety net, and that true wealth is measured in relationships as much as bank balances. And most importantly, we both learned that love without respect is hollow. But love with respect can transform everything. These days, I spend time in my beautiful condo and time with my son's family. Marcus and Jessica bought the house next door to mine when their second child was born. Not because they felt obligated to take care of me, but because they genuinely wanted our family to be close. I help with the grandchildren not as free childcare, but as a grandmother whose wisdom and experience are valued. Marcus asks for my advice not just on financial matters, but on major life decisions. Jessica and I have developed our own friendship, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the way I handled things, if I think I was too harsh or manipulative. I don't, because the alternative was watching my son become someone I couldn't recognize, someone who saw elderly people as burdens to be managed rather than human beings deserving of dignity. Someone who mistook convenience for love and efficiency for kindness. The trust fund was never really about the money. It was about trust, the kind that has to be earned through actions, not inherited through DNA. And in the end, Marcus earned it. Not the money, although he got that too. He earned something much more valuable, the knowledge that he was capable of being the kind of man his father would have been proud of. As for me, I got my son back. The real one, not the successful but shallow version who had been slowly replacing him over the years. And I got myself back too. The version of me that knew my own worth and wasn't afraid to insist that others recognize it. If you haven't subscribed yet, click the button now to join our community of women who refuse to be invisible. You'll find stories like this one every day, stories that remind us all that sometimes the quietest response speaks the loudest. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.